Central America, the Middle East, South Africa. Our people are dying here. Manuel Moreno last year was working applying methyl bromide to a field that was to be planted in strawberries. In the third year of accumulating that methyl bromide, he got knocked off the tractor, almost died over the weekend. He's totally disabled, has frequent seizures and a high dosage of Dilantin. His wife didn't fare very well. She died last year. She was 39 years old with an enlarged liver, and suspicion of the doctors is accumulation of those pesticides. My father died in 1980. And he also died from the symptoms of a long life of accumulating those chemicals. And the only thing that our government has the gall to do is call hearings around the country to see if they are going to implement a national standard for having bathroom facilities and washrooms in the fields, to wash our hands, to have a toilet on the work site. It is a disgrace to our families, to our children, to the women, to be seeking the nearest cornfield, the nearest woods, and the nearest ditch, to have to go to the bathroom. And talk about sexual harassment, where I've seen my little sisters of my family have to go into the field of corn, and then to find them coming crying from there because the growers' kids were spying on them. Those are not humane working conditions. Well, you see, this is why we went on strike. Over 2,000 of us walked out of the fields and what is now has been the largest agricultural strike in the history of the Midwest. We've been on strike since 1978. This summer will be our 6th season of picketing those tomato fields. And we haven't done it with a great amount of opposition. The first people to come out and try to break the strike were the growers' vigilante groups. When the growers couldn't break the strike, they put pressure on the sheriff of the county where the strike originated to do something about us. Well, he did a lot of things, but the worst thing he did, when we approached a field of farm workers who were a half a mile away from the road, we asked how we could communicate with those workers, because when we went to the labor camp, the grower had a German police dog running on a line back and forth, so no one could get in or out without being inspected by the labor contractor, who promptly would come out with a pistol. So we said, we have a right to talk to those workers. So we took 700-800 workers to a picket line in front of that field and did an act of civil disobedience and marched into the field and sat down with those workers until they all walked out. The sheriff managed to come and arrest 27 of us after it was over, but 27 of us were still in the field, and the sheriff arrested us. Took us to jail. While we were in a holding pen behind the jail, the sheriff came out while we were talking to our attorney, who wasn't even a Mexican. He was a nice Irish guy from Cleveland who came down to be our staff lawyer, wanting to arrest our lawyer on a traffic violation. Not only arrest him, but bring him into custody. When our lawyer told him he had to be crazy, the sheriff said to his deputies to jump him. 4 deputies and a farmer jumped him and beat our attorney, John Kilroy, unconscious. While he was left splattered in a pool of blood in front of over 40 witnesses, including 2 lawyers, 2 priests, 5 Roman Catholic nuns. They dragged him into the jail, and after he was hospitalized, the neurologist informed us that they had fractured his skull, caused him cranial nerve damage, and to this day that attorney is still disabled. We sued that sheriff in the federal court, a case that was litigated for more than 4 years. While it was being litigated, 4 of his deputies got nervous and told him that they were no longer going to cover up for him. So the sheriff fired them. Those 4 deputies hired a lawyer, sued the sheriff for wrongful firing. The sheriff got rid of that lawyer by burning his house down and running him out of the state. That lawyer has hired another attorney to sue the sheriff for that. Then there was a grand jury indictment where that sheriff was indicted on 27 counts, 11 of them felonies. He whitewashed all his charges by running all the witnesses out of the state. The state appointed a special prosecutor to investigate that sheriff. The special prosecutor couldn't find a single witness to testify against that sheriff in that county because everybody feared him. And they told us, what are you Mexicans going to do against that sheriff? A grand jury couldn't do nothing. His own deputies couldn't do nothing. A special prosecutor couldn't do nothing. Well, I said, well, maybe we can't do nothing. But I'll tell you what, we were getting arrested and beat up before the strike, and now we're getting arrested and beat up because we're in the strike. At least now it's happening for a good reason. We just won that case in January. Not only did we win the case, we got a permanent injunction against that sheriff to stay at least 35 feet away from any organizer, any member, any picketer in that county. So now, when the sheriff couldn't break the strike, they brought in the Ku Klux Klan, burned the cross in front of our field headquarters, shotgun blasted out the windows of our office in that county. And their favorite trick was take the internal organs of farm animals or the sex organs of those farm animals and stake the bloody mess of the front doors of people that supported us in that county to intimidate them, to keep them from coming to meetings. But the people still kept coming to meetings. And now, their latest way of attacking us, you know, there aren't a whole lot of laws in this country that protect the farm workers outside of California. And even now, Caesar has announced that the ALRA is dead, and we're going back to the streets and back to the boycott. The latest tool that they're using to fight us, Campbell Soup's main argument is that they're not the employers of the farm workers because they use this medieval system of crop contracting to wash their hands of any responsibility of the people who do the work on the bottom of the industry. They're saying they point the finger to the growers that contract to grow the tomatoes and the pickles for them. Well, now the growers are saying they're not the employers either. Last year in a federal court ruling, a precedent, a grower was found innocent of mass violations of child labor because the judge says we are now sharecroppers. We're independent contractors, self-employed. So now we can forget about child labor standards, minimum wage standards, Social Security, and anything else that has existed, the minimal things to protect us. That they're using that now as a defense to keep us from filing workmen's compensation claims in those 2 states. But you know, we all know where that system of sharecropping came from. And I think that this brings us together with a whole new dimension of people to be involved in this struggle. You see, when the Civil War was ended over 100 years ago, the slave owners had to come up with a new system to keep them folks on the plantations without calling them slaves. So they invented this crop contracting, sharecropping arrangement and kept the people on the plantation to keep exploiting them. So I'm telling you that the Civil War never ended. The only thing that was ended in those years was the financial fight between the financial interests of the industrial North and the agricultural South. They settled their problems, but the poor people kept on suffering. The people still kept getting exploited. And those things that came out of that oppression were the things that were being fought in the civil rights movement. The movements that we have today, we're fighting still the consequences of that system of oppression and repression. So now, in agriculture, in the Midwest anyway, they're not black folk doing that work, they're the Mexican folk. I guess that makes us the new niggers in this country. So, when you're in that situation, the only thing we learn how to do is to figure out a way to regain some kind of spirit as a human being. Because it's not easy to watch your mother, to watch your little sisters, your little brothers, thinking, suffering, to become a statistic. It is no wonder why among farm worker women, the miscarriage rate is 125% higher than the rest of the female population, that the infant mortality rate is 7 times higher than the national average, that our life expectancy is 49 years, lower for our members. The 17 members in our organization that have passed away in the last 7 years, their average age was 39 years. And then the British Broadcasting Company documents 2 summers ago that 40% of the workforce in those pickles and tomato fields are children under 15 years of age. We're asking for Americans to stand up again, and not only to eliminate the people from a suffering situation, but eliminate the system altogether and finally end the Civil War. We've gotten a big education to know who the enemy is. The enemy is just not Campbell soup. Why we're at Campbell soup is a mechanism of the real oppressor. When we started looking at who Campbell soup is, you know who Campbell soup really is? Campbell soup is the Philadelphia National Bank, the Philadelphia International Bank, the Bank of New Jersey, the Prudential Insurance Company, the Ford Motor Company. These are the people with the controlling stock in that company. Morgan Guaranty Trust. They're the same people whose directors control the financial centers that monopolize our lives and those of other people who are being oppressed in Latin America. The reason Campbell soup is threatened with us eliminating their crop contracting and sharecropping system is because it opens the door to something phenomenal. We are only going to be organizing 3,000 workers in a contract with Campbell Soup if you help us with the boycott. But Heinz, Hunt, Stokely Van Camp, Del Monte, all the major food processors in this country have operations in the Midwest. When you total up the workers working under that crop contracting and sharecropping system, you're talking about 60 to 80,000 farm workers that are being enslaved by that system of sharecropping and crop contracting. And because most of these workers are migrant workers, can you imagine a group of organized of 60 to 80,000 farm workers migrating back to their home states in Texas and Florida? Some of you have asked, when is Cesar Chavez going to get out of California? Well, we are the organizing committee that is breaking that ground to establish that National Union of Farm Workers so these financial interests, and they're the same financial interests that control the citrus groves of Florida and Texas and the vegetables in South Florida and Texas, the same financial interests. We're going to cut off their oppressive system around the country. And that is not going to be enough. We have to develop our vision to include within our ranks, within our movement, those farm workers that are struggling against the same companies in Canada, in Mexico, in Guatemala, in Belize, and other parts of the world where the same companies and the same financial interests are oppressing the same people that do the same jobs that we do in this country. Campbell Soup is in town tomorrow morning. They heard about that we're doing something at the Democratic Convention next week. So we got the word last night that they're coming in to put some heavy pressure on the leadership of the National Democratic Party. We've just learned today that they're going to be offering them some money. They're beginning to throw money all over the place. I got calls from the National Council of La Raza. I've got calls from the Texas Migrant Council, from all the groups who deal with the farm worker issues in the Midwest, offering them $70, $80, $150, $130,000 a shot. Let them spend their money. We're still going to boycott. I want to leave you with one thought. You know, a lot of people tell us, geez, how can you people fight for so long? How can you people think you're going to win against these big money people? Well, you know, the issue is not whether we got more money than them, but whether we have that spirit of struggle that's going to outlast the money they're going to be willing to spend on us. And Cesar Chavez put it more eloquently, I think, than anyone can put it. He said, well, you know, these big companies, they got money. Mr. Rombach or Mr. O'Brien from the Campbell Soup Company will be the ones coming in town tomorrow. Now, they probably flew in their first class. They're probably staying in the nicest hotel in town. They'll probably eat the nicest meals. I mean, all of that is going to take some money. And they got some. And we don't have that. But somehow we managed to get from Ohio to here with the help of our friends. We get a meal in their homes, sleep in their homes. It's not costing us anything. The only thing it's costing us is our time. So the real contest is between the time that we're investing and the money that they're investing. And you tell us what there's a lot more of, time or money. And money's got to run out before time, and that's what we're going to win. Boycott! 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 ¡Que viva la huelga!
Thank you. Velasquez. They have people coming from Vermont to San Francisco for the convention in San Francisco. The hotels are going to be full. But we have our own coming to the People's Convention. I'm talking about the United States Congressman Ronald Dellums. Dellums. Go ahead. Yeah.
Brothers and sisters of the deists and brothers and sisters of the People's Convention, it's a special pleasure and a privilege for me to address you tonight. When Dan Siegel asked me to speak and we agreed, I asked, what is being asked of me? What do they want me to talk about? They said, well, tell Ron he has 30 minutes, and what would he say to the progressive community in 30 minutes? But don't forget to talk about coalition politics. So I'm going to try to talk with you, maybe 30 minutes. I know the hour's drawing late. But I want to begin by talking about coalition politics, and then let's move to the moment. Indulge me for a moment as I try to walk you briefly through my own thought process that leads me to the conclusion that coalition politics is the only hope that we have to bring sanity and change to our communities, to our nation, and to our world. What brings us together in this room, I believe very profoundly, from the length and breadth of this country, is not only the idealism and the enthusiasm and the courage to challenge insanity, but what brings us together is that we share a set of politics. And I believe in order to have a set of politics, one has to have four things: a value system upon which that set of politics is firmly rooted, an analytical frame of reference, a set of goals and objectives, and finally a strategy that you seek to achieve those goals and objectives. You begin with values. Remember, Martin Luther King, before he died, said the revolution must be a revolution of values. Your politics are rooted firmly in your belief system. Let me give you 3 examples of my own belief system. First, every human being on the face of this earth, every human being, has the right to flower, to grow, and to function and realize their fullest and total potential as human beings. Another value, simply stated, says that life, not money, not bullets, not bombs, not property, life is the most precious substance on the face of this earth. A third value simply says that each of us must assume the responsibility for the world we see. Stated a different way, we must all be responsible for the knowledge we have. If we see and understand oppression, we must challenge it. If we see and understand injustice, we must challenge it. We must be responsible for what we see. Now, if you take those basic values, that then becomes the basis upon which you establish an analysis. Because the first question, What endangers life and inhibits growth? If each human being has the right to grow to their fullest potential, and that life is a very precious substance, what endangers that life and what inhibits growth? Racism inhibits life and impedes growth. Sexism inhibits life and impedes growth. Age chauvinism, discrimination against sexual preference, insensitivity to people in wheelchairs, people who cannot see, people who cannot hear. These are all forms of how we deny human beings the opportunity to function. My brother mentioned that he was one of the new niggers. For those of you in the Bay Area, you remember back in the early 70s, I used to give a nigger speech. I used to talk about redefining who the niggers of America are. If you take the definition that a nigger is anyone in our society whose role is defined, limited by others, whose opportunities are defined and limited by others, and whose justice is meted out on the basis of expediency and not truth and mercy. Good news for all black people in this room. You don't have to be black to be treated like a nigger in America. If you apply that definition, they're black niggers, brown niggers, red niggers, yellow niggers, white niggers, women niggers, gay niggers, student niggers, peace niggers, old niggers, poor niggers, working class niggers. This is a nation where the majority of people are niggers. And if the niggers ever unite, we can bring change in this country. But I'm getting ahead of my rap. If you start with a set of values, as I said, and apply them to the world around you and ask those questions, what inhibits the life of these people? What endangers people? Acid rain endangers life. Polluting the air and polluting the water endangers life. Labor practices that kill and destroy and dehumanize endangers life. Nuclear weapons endanger life. The mentality of war endangers life. Militaristic, interventionist foreign policies endanger life. A set of human priorities that have us spending billions of dollars building a monument to military madness and denying us the capacity to address the human misery of people in the various forms that it is visited upon them endangers life. So once you start with a set of values, one's belief system, what we think ought to be right in the world, we then look at our society to determine what are the factors that preclude that value from going forward. Then taking us to the third aspect of politics, a plan, a set of goals and objectives, policies and programs and ideas that will move forward these values. Programs that will strike down for all time the vestiges of racism and sexism and age chauvinism and classism and prejudice against sexual preference, insensitivity to human beings with a variety of problems as they attempt to confront life. Talk about new priorities, new ways of solving the problems of unemployment and poverty and hunger and disease, ways of rebuilding the cities to make them monuments to our brilliance and our genius and our sensitivities, and not monuments to our madness. Challenging the nuclear arms race, all of these things become goals and objectives that we attempt to achieve to implement our value system. But then how do you get to coalition? You have to have a strategy by which you seek to achieve those programs, those policies, those ideas, those objectives, those goals. Coalition politics, where all the various people who have been harmed by a system that wreaks oppression, by a system that advocates injustice, by a system that threatens, by a system that establishes a set of priorities that adversely impact the lives of millions of people. So coalition politics is simply the convergence of people with mutual self-interest. People don't move for your reasons, they move for their own. People don't move for my reasons, they move for their own. And so tonight what my speech is simply about is to help redefine what everybody's self-interest is. If you are one of the niggas that I alluded to earlier, then we have a common self-interest in eradicating niggerism in all of the forms that it is visited upon the people, whether it's sexism or racism or whatever. The Democratic Party has now decided, we will place a woman on the ticket. And some people will say, magnificent victory, our job is done. Our response is, you've only opened the door. There are millions of people that have to rush through that door. There are still niggas out there who are not inside that process. Which leads me now to the main point that I want to make. The sign says, unite, dump Reagan. Let me start with dump Reagan and then come to unite. Clearly, we must get rid of this administration. And it's not just Ronald Reagan, the personality. We are not that naive and shallow in our understanding. It is getting rid of a mentality, a set of politics in this country that are dangerous and frightening. Understand, our children would not forgive us if we do not rid them of this madness and this danger. Here is a mentality that seeks to achieve peace by preparing for war. Here's a mentality that calls an MX missile a peacekeeper, when we all know its only function is to destroy life at an awesome level. Here's a mentality that says Central America is in our backyard. Here's a mentality that says we must manipulate and exploit El Salvador, militarize Honduras, threaten Nicaragua, invade Grenada, get in bed with South Africa. Here's an administration that makes a distinction between the good communists and the bad communists. The good communists are the ones that can bomb us back. The bad communists are the tiny little nations that we can bully with CIA monies and Contras and other things. This kind of mentality has to be dumped. There's no question about that. It can and it will be done by the people, because when the people stand up, they can defeat Ronald Reagan. He is not invincible. This man can be defeated, and so can his administration. But here's my admonishment. First, I make a simple statement. Big turnout, Reagan loses. Small turnout, Reagan's people win. But this is my admonishment. The only way that we would defeat Ronald Reagan is in unity. But people cannot unify in a vacuum. I hear the press and other people running around saying, we better unify to defeat Reagan, as if in some way you can unify without purpose. You have to unify with a purpose. And there's unfinished business. Jesse Jackson's campaign, the Rainbow Coalition, has 4 minority reports that we ought to make the cornerstone of the Democratic Party. Yes, you've now placed a sister on the national ticket. That's eons of time overdue. But understand this, it wasn't so much that Mondale made a choice. You know why the sister's on the ticket? Because women stood up without equivocation and clarity and said, there will be a woman in '84 and it will be Geraldine Ferraro. And who was it? A woman in Geraldine Ferraro. He had no decision. And what I'm saying to you is we must now say to our brothers and sisters in the Democratic Party, you must now speak with equal force and equal clarity on the issue of no first use of nuclear weapons. Let's talk about it for just a moment. I've asked the question of the Pentagon. The Soviet Union has publicly said they would embrace the policy of no first use. Why can't this administration embrace that policy? Their response was, because we don't want the Soviet Union to believe that under certain circumstances we would not strike them first. Now, what that's saying, brothers and sisters, is that we have moved beyond deterrence to the development of a war-fighting capability, and as many of you heard me say before, anyone who believes that we can fight, survive, and win a nuclear war is by definition certifiably mentally disturbed. And so the Democratic Party, in my estimation, has an obligation to go on record in opposition to the use of nuclear weaponry. And if people could speak clearly about a woman on the ticket and who that woman could be and when, what that should signal us is when you speak with clarity and with unity and with force, the establishment has no other recourse but to deal with it. And so one of the causes that we must champion now over these next several days, and win, lose, or draw in the next several days, go home and organize in the local communities, because remember, politicians hurt at home. If you want to get to a politician, it's not in Washington where you hurt them at home. And so if we lose here in 7 days, there's places to come back. But we have to challenge them on no first use of nuclear weaponry. That endangers life. That's an aspect of the coalition. A bomb is an equal opportunity destroyer. It doesn't care what color you are, what your sex is, your religion, what your sexual preference, or whatever. And if we can be equalized in the sight of a bomb, we damn well can organize in the spirit of peace. Secondly, we must advocate that the Democratic Party embrace the minority report that calls for substantial reductions in American military budget. When I went to Congress in 1971, the American military budget was $70-some-odd billion. 10 years later, fiscal 1981, $173 billion. Fiscal 82, $218 billion. Fiscal 83, $244 billion. Fiscal 84, $265 billion. And this year, Ronald Reagan asked the Congress of the United States for $313 billion. And I sat in a House-Senate conference just 2 weeks ago across the table from John Towers, and he looked the House members in the eye and said, not a dime less than $299 billion for the military budget. Now, for the Democratic Party to say, we will only slow down the increase is an absurdity. Listen to this. If you accept zero growth this fiscal year, zero growth means that you accept all of the assumption of the Reagan budget last year. But we've been reduced to auctioneers. The president says, I want 13.5% real growth. Then the kind of conservatives say, well, I'm willing to back down to 7.5% real growth. Then the moderates say, I won't go a dime below 6% real growth. Then the real liberals say, well, I'm for 3 or 4% real growth. I said, if you take it to zero, you accept Reagan last year, we ought to not be talking about real growth, but real reduction. And that's what this minority report calls for. How do you achieve real reduction? First, you take the policy position that our responsibility is to end the danger of nuclear war, which means you stop the MX missile, the B-1 bomber, the Pershing missile, the cruise missile, the Trident missile. If you say we don't need to spend money on redundant, unnecessary, wasteful weapon systems, then why spend $40 billion building 100 B-1 bombers that will be obsolete before you build them? Why build 200 more additional surface ships when we found out in the Falkland Islands that a 10-cent missile could knock out a multi-million-dollar surface ship, and that was Argentina, considered a fourth-rate naval power. Suppose we were in a confrontation with the Soviet Union. What did all those 600 surface ships mean then when they're not throwing 10-cent missiles at us, but very sophisticated forms of weaponry? This is madness. It's not necessary. If you accept the position that a militaristic interventionist foreign policy is inappropriate, then take all the money out for the rapid deployment force. You don't need them. What about the fact that your taxpayers' dollars spent over $1,000 to buy a $4 wrench, several $100s to buy a $2 bolt? And we have to cut social programs, and the Democratic Party's best position is we want to slow down the rate of growth? That makes no sense. Third program that we must embrace as a minority plank: affirmative action. Here we are in 1984 in America, and we're still sitting down, drawing artful words to define the nature of our relationship with each other. We must take a very basic and fundamental and simplistic statement. All human beings in this country should have the right to flower and function and grow and realize their fullest and total potential as human beings, and the role of the government should be to guarantee those rights and to enforce those laws to the limit. We should not have to sit around here talking about what should be affirmative action. Black and brown and red and yellow people have a right to grow. Women have a right to function. Gay and lesbian people have a right to be gay and lesbian. We have to get beyond these archaic, antiquated, ancient ideas about what human beings ought to be like, platitudes and morality that makes no sense. We can moralize about the gay community, but we don't moralize about invading Grenada or building nuclear weapons that kill and threaten our children. The fourth minority plank, very simple: the Voting Rights Act. Now understand that's controversial. In a democratic society where voting ought to be the basic expression of people as they participate in the process. But we have to now present a minority report to the floor of Congress, to the floor of the convention. My point is simply this: A, we must end Reagan's madness. As I said, our children will not forgive us. But the only way it will be done is if we unify. And we can only unify when there is a purpose. That means people's self-interest must be realized. People must feel that there is something in it for them to unify. And I'm saying to the women, to all the Rainbow Coalition, if you could make the Democratic Party deal with a woman on the ticket, then you can make the Democratic Party in this country do anything you want them to do, as long as you understand what you want to do and make the point with clarity and with force and with conviction and with unity. Again, stop first use of nuclear weaponry. Stop the notion of increasing the military budget. Stop these compromising words about affirmative action and no quotas. I mean, this doesn't make any sense. If we say that 50% of this country are women, and women should be involved in 50% of all the business, then that's quota. They only have 2 people on the national ticket when they said one to be a woman, that's quota. So then when it comes to black and third world people, well, we don't want quotas. I mean, this is absurdity. We have to make a clear and honest and unequivocal statement. What I'm saying to all of you is that I appreciate all of you being here, because it's uplifting to each of us in this room to know that we don't struggle alone. And many of you have traveled several hundred miles, some a few thousand miles, just to come and experience the camaraderie and the brotherhood and sisterhood of other people who understand the madness and who are still willing to struggle. Well, let's continue over the next several days to generate powerful ideas, but also let some of your energy be heard as this other party generates its activity over in San Francisco. For those of you in this room who are members of the activist feminist community, go to San Francisco and demand to meet with the feminists inside the Democratic Party and say, let's talk about where we're going. Those of you who are activists in the peace movement in this room, go to San Francisco, ask to meet with the Peace Caucus, and talk about where the Peace Caucus in the Democratic Party is going to be on the issue of reducing the military budget and no first use. Those of you who are members of the farm labor activist community, go to San Francisco and meet with the Farm Labor Caucus, meet with the Brown Caucus, meet with the Black Caucus. What I'm saying is that we must now begin to unfold a strategy of dialogue and communication. You and I are advocates of peace. You and I believe that talking and negotiating and face-to-face confrontation is better than war and violence and hostility. So let's make it work. When you finish the convention, when you have clearly in your mind what the progressive agenda ought to be, take it across to San Francisco and demand that it be heard. There are progressives inside the Democratic Party and progressives outside the Democratic Party. The sister said, some of you, like Ron Dellums, what have you, someday you ought to march out, start another party. Maybe, but at this particular moment, we have to let our progressive ideas be known in the lonely solitude of a party where we are not in the majority. And sometimes that's when the real courage of your convictions have to come out, when you're not surrounded by everybody that thinks the way you think, but when you're surrounded by people who don't think the way you think, and you still talk about peace and jobs and justice and freedom and human dignity and the human spirit, then that's when the coalition really makes sense. I look around at Dan and some of the others. Dan's hair's thinning, lines etched in our face, hair turning white. There are many of us who have been struggling for a long time. But back 10 or 15 years ago, Dan, we thought we were running 100 meters. We thought we could change the world yesterday. But as we get older, we find out that it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. But understand this, brothers and sisters, as long as you're willing to run, there are some of us here willing to go that 26 miles, 385 yards, till we achieve freedom, peace, justice, and dignity for the human spirit and the human condition, and I join you in that effort.
Ron Dellums! Ron Dellums, ladies and gentlemen. Ron Dellums.